Hermeneutics as Apprenticeship is about the self-interpreting nature of Scripture and the implications that ought to have for the way we learn to interpret. It takes as its starting point the famous assertion that Luther made back in the early days of the Reformation, that sacred Scripture is its own interpreter, that Scripture interprets Scripture. Our tendency over the subsequent centuries has been to take that idea of Scripture interpreting Scripture and use it to speak about what we do when we take one biblical text that seems clear and congenial to us and use it to interpret another that seems less clear or less congenial. And that's not a bad practice, but what I want to direct our attention to in this book is something bigger and more comprehensive and more generative than that. I want to focus our attention on the way in which the biblical writers themselves go about interpreting and appropriating and applying the texts and traditions that functioned as Scripture for them, and see what we can learn from that about how we are to interpret Scripture ourselves. So there are chapters on how praying the Psalms trains us in the way we receive and read the Scriptures, what the book of Ruth shows us about the relationship between virtue and hermeneutics, how the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts teach us to understand the interpretive relationship between Scripture and Gospel, and so on. Chapter by chapter, issue by issue, I want to model the way that Scripture teaches us how to read Scripture, because that, I think, is the fundamental hermeneutical discipline.